My name is Camille Harper. I'm 41 years old, and I used to command one of the most classified tactical units in the military Thanatos 12. But today I'm just a woman in the back row, wearing an old army jacket that still smells like rain and dust and fire. The air inside the banquet hall is too clean, too scripted. My father's retirement ceremony is everything he wanted. Rows of pressed uniforms, polished shoes, and people who still pretend rank means relevance. He's already told the story 3 times about the war zone he diffused with a phone call, about the protocol he invented, about the medals he never talks about, but always wears. He stands tall at the podium, glowing under the lights, as if nothing has ever knocked him off balance. Not even me. I sink lower in my seat, letting the shadows do what they've always done, hold me in place. My sister sits up front, perfect posture pearls, and red lipstick, the golden child who stayed in the system. Then it happens. He sees me, and instead of ignoring me what I expected, he smiles and says loud enough for the whole room to hear she's a washed-up soldier. The words hit like cold water to the face. But he's not finished. That old jacket doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong here. My sister laughs not because it's funny, but because it's rehearsed. Always dressing like she's still someone. Poor thing. The chuckles are polite, quiet, ugly. No one looks back at me, except one man, General Ellison. He's late, walking briskly down the center aisle, scanning the crowd for a seat. His eyes land on mine. No, not on mine, on my arm. The sleeve of my jacket has slid up slightly, just enough to reveal the black ink beneath a coiled viper wrapped around a shattered pocket watch. The insignia of Thanatos 12, a mark that was never supposed to exist, because we were never supposed to survive. General Ellison stops, takes one step back, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Captain Harper. Our hero. For a second the room freezes, then like a rising wave everyone stands. The applause begins. Hands clap, some mouths drop open, others murmur things like, "Is that really her?" And wait. She's alive. My father doesn't move. He just stands there, his jaw slightly open as if the words caught in his throat refuse to finish forming. For the first time, he can't control the room. And I don't stand. I just sit there, watching them all rise around me. Because this is not the end of my story. It's the beginning of his reckoning. They buried my name 7 years ago. They sealed my records, called me unstable, called me dead. But the truth has a longer memory than any file. And now that it's standing on its feet, they're going to remember everything. Even the parts they tried to erase, especially those. I stay seated, not because I'm broken, but because I've already stood through hell. Let them stand for once, and let him, my father, finally learn what it feels like to be silent in a room that no longer listens to his version of the story. They didn't say I failed. They said I fractured. Officially, my final mission record reads, "Subject exhibits signs of prolonged psychological distress, following exposure to fatal combat scenario. Recommendation discharge with limited honors, unsuitable for continued field command. Unfit for service," that was the phrase they used. Clean, clinical. Like they weren't slicing my name out of every unit log I had ever bled into. But I wasn't unfit. I wasn't even injured. I didn't lose a leg. I lost the benefit of the doubt. And that loss came not from the battlefield, but from the pen of the one man who should have known better. The man who raised me to salute first and question never. My father. It was his signature on the discharge, not a stranger's, not a bureaucrat's, his. And he never looked me in the eye when he signed it. I remember the day the decision came down. A letter in a plain envelope, no military seal, no return address. Just my name printed neatly, almost impersonally across the front. Inside 3 pages. 1 assessment, 1 ruling, 1 death sentence for my career. There was a post-it note stuck to the top. "Camille, this is what's best. Let it go." It was in his handwriting. No signature, no rank. Just the kind of fatherly concern that pretends to be compassion while quietly pulling the plug. He didn't call, didn't visit, didn't explain. Later, I found out he had drafted the language himself. He called it strategic preservation, said it was necessary to protect the family reputation and avoid unnecessary fallout. From my survival? That's the part they never say out loud. That survival becomes inconvenient when it contradicts the narrative, especially when you come back alive from a mission they expected needed you to die in. I wasn't the only one on the field that day. We lost 3. I dragged our commanding officer, Colonel Merrick, through 2 miles of enemy territory to reach extraction. And still, when the helicopters came, they only pulled me out. He didn't make it. At least that's what they told me. But deep down, something never sat right. The silence was too curated, too complete. There were no funerals, no statements, no confirmation. Just a single line in the post-op brief. Subject deceased. Remains unrecovered, presumed casualty. And then 1 month later, a glitch in a medical archive pulled up a patient intake at a NATO base hospital in Germany. Facial obscured, vitals redacted. But the timestamp matched, the injury report matched, and the intake notes included something I couldn't forget. Patient sustained critical trauma during unreported classified extraction attempt. Required emergency intervention. They tried to bury him, and in the process they buried me too. Because I had seen too much, because I had come back, because I didn't die when I was supposed to. So they folded the file closed and labeled me unstable. They said it nicely, wrapped in terms like operational fatigue and compromised situational response. But I know the truth. They needed me out before I could talk. So I didn't talk. Not at first. I listened. I remembered. I kept every document they forgot to scrub. Every shadow I walked through became a map. Every time someone turned their back on me, I took note. And I waited. Because they were sloppy. And power makes people arrogant. They thought I'd disappear, but I didn't. I just learned how to do what they did better, quietly, strategically, without mercy, and now they're going to remember the name they tried to erase. They're going to remember what I did, and who I saved, even if they'd rather forget. It happened in the spring of 2017. Back then, I was still Captain Camille Harper of Thanatos 12, our nation's most covert tactical rescue unit. We didn't exist on paper. We didn't wear insignias. We didn't return home with stories. Our orders came from dark corridors. Our missions were stamped with dates, but no names. And the one that changed everything, it was supposed to be a routine extract. A diplomatic envoy had been taken along the outer border of Coast Province. 6 American civilians. No known hostiles. In and out in under 4 hours at least, that's what Intel said. We were wheels up at 2300. By 01:15, we were surrounded. I still remember the sound of the air going still right before the first mortar hit. A hum, then the roar, then the blood. The terrain was unforgiving, narrow rocks, no aerial cover radio interference. Within 20 minutes, we lost Rios, then Fenner, then Cho. I still hear Fenner's voice sometimes asking if I see the flashes. I did. But they weren't flares, they were gunships, and they weren't ours. I took a round in the thigh, not deep but enough to stagger. Merrick, our commanding officer, was hit in the back just below the shoulder blade. He couldn't walk, and our evac was gone, scrubbed mid-mission with no explanation. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Protocol required that a field evac be deployed under these circumstances. I radioed for fallback support 3 times. The reply came once. No extraction authorized. Stand down. The voice on the line. It was my father. He was the regional commander at the time, oversaw operations across the entire corridor. His voice didn't shake. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask if I was alive. He just terminated the channel. We were left for dead. I dragged Merrick for nearly 18 kilometers, through dry riverbeds and sniper territory under moonless skies and intermittent fire. He went in and out of consciousness. I stapled one of his wounds closed with my own belt clip. We made it to an old UN supply outpost near the southern ridge. A local farmer with a mule cart carried us the last 4 miles to a NATO checkpoint, and somehow we got out. But that's not what the report says. The official debrief stated that Merrick died in combat, and that I, while commendable for surviving, was no longer fit for field leadership. The report specifically cited inability to secure commanding officer's life and failure to maintain team integrity. 3 soldiers dead, 1 commander erased, and 1 woman blamed, the same woman who carried a 200-pound man across a warpath while limping from a bullet wound. That woman was me. But by the time I landed back in D.C., the damage had already been done. My team was disbanded. My name was left out of the final briefing. And my father, he filed a statement declaring that my return had been unexpected and emotionally unstable. It's a clever thing when someone makes your survival look like a liability. They took my uniform, my command, my future, but they didn't take my memory. And they didn't know what I'd carried out with me, not just Merrick. I carried out the truth. And someday, I knew I would bring it back into the light, even if I had to dig through every grave they made to find it. After they buried the truth, they tried to bury the proof. Thanatos 12 was wiped clean from every database I could access. Unit insignias gone. Operational logs erased or sealed under black tier non-recoverables. Medical records redacted beyond recognition. And the tattoo our mark was scrubbed from existence. A coiled serpent around a shattered pocket watch. They said it never meant anything. Said it was personal artwork. Said it wasn't official. But it was. And I had it inked on my arm the day after I carried Colonel Merrick out of the fire. I wasn't going to let the world forget what we were. The brass tried, though. Hard. They pulled the photos, reissued badges, reassigned code names. Even our death notices were copy-pasted with recycled dates. But they missed one thing. Memory. And I remembered everything. 2 years after my discharge, I came across a file during a consultation project overseas. It was innocuous at first, just a medical image buried in a training slide. But something about the patient caught my eye. A tall man on a hospital gurney in Landstuhl, Germany. His face was blurred. The name blacked out. But the scar across his left shoulder blade, I knew that scar. I put it there clumsily, closed it with a belt clip and trembling hands. That scar belonged to Colonel Merrick. And if he was in that room, he wasn't dead. At least not when they said he was. I requested access to the full file. Denied. I asked again through another channel. Also denied. But a junior tech I'd trained years ago still owed me a favor. A week later, I had a partial record. Just enough to know that someone had checked Merrick into that hospital under a false patient ID. Internal notes described his condition as critical trauma due to extraction under duress. The file was dated 5 days after our mission ended. 5 days. Long enough for the story to be rewritten, for medals to be reassigned, for my name to be deleted. I stared at the screen for hours. Not because I doubted what I saw, but because it confirmed what I already knew. They let him live. They let me fall. And someone with power wanted it that way. That was the moment I stopped mourning and started digging. I pulled every connection I had left: old team members, former analysts, medics, logistics officers, people who owed me, people who feared me, and people who still respected what Thanatos 12 had stood for. Each piece of information I found was like bone from a grave, unsettling, buried deep and necessary. Emails with mismatched timestamps, deployment orders that didn't match flight logs, shipping manifests rerouted through ghost bases. Patterns emerged, patterns they didn't think I'd be patient enough to trace. But patience was all I had left. I created a private ledger, cross-referenced every name, mapped out every silence. Because silence in the military is never just absence. It's signal. Something had happened to Merrick after that hospital visit. Something they didn't want anyone to know. And the only way to protect that secret was to destroy the one person who might still ask questions. Me. They didn't just try to erase my name. They tried to make sure I never had a reason to speak it again. But here I am, and every step I take toward the truth is one they never saw coming. Because when they buried Thanatos 12, they forgot I was still breathing. The deeper I dug, the more rotten the roots became. And one night, while tracing back internal comms routed through an old secure archive, I found something they'd missed. A voice file, encrypted, buried inside a mislabeled zip folder tagged under logistics. I cracked it open. The moment I heard my father's voice, my lungs went still. If she finds out Merrick's alive, she'll dig. She won't stop. I'll lose everything. Silence. Then a second voice responded, gravelly dismissive. She won't. She's isolated. Nobody listens to disgraced captains, Richard. Disgraced. That word hung in the air like ash. My father answered again lower, now his voice edged with fear, masked as resolve. You don't know Camille like I do. That girl doesn't sleep when she smells blood. If she uncovers what we did, this ceremony we're planning retirement honors, it all goes up in smoke. Then came the final line that shifted the ground beneath me. I built this career from nothing. I won't let my own daughter ruin it. Click. The file ended. I sat in silence, hearing my heartbeat thunder like boots on concrete. My own father, not just complicit, active. He'd stood over my discharge papers, signed them, branded me unstable, to protect his reputation. He chose betrayal wrapped in protocol, and now he was being honored pinned with medals earned while I bled in shadows. I stared at the waveform of the audio, hands trembling. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was systemic. It was criminal, so I made a copy. 2 actually, one I stashed in a safe house in Arlington. The other I burned to a drive and addressed to one man who might still remember the debt he owed. General Thomas Ellison. He and Merrick had served together long before Thanatos 12 was even formed. Merrick had once pulled Ellison out of a collapsed barrack in Helmand. Saved his life. I'd heard the story whispered by grunts when I was just a cadet. If Merrick was alive, Ellison would care. He had to. I found an unlisted mailing address through a backdoor contact in VA records. Not official, but real. I packaged the drive inside an empty metal case. No note, no threats, just the recording. And my name, Captain Camille Harper. I sent it priority and waited. 3 days, no response. 5, nothing. I kept checking my burner line, refreshing encrypted inboxes, scanning every incoming trace. Still nothing, but I refused to believe he hadn't heard it. Because there are things you can unsee, but you can't unhear your own name tied to betrayal. And I knew Ellison. Knew what honor meant to men like him, to men who'd buried friends and seen their faces each time they closed their eyes. My father, on the other hand, slept just fine. He paraded around D.C., giving keynote speeches, hosted luncheons about tactical resilience, shook hands with senators, and never once mentioned the daughter who once served beside the very men he buried in classified reports. I started leaving hints. A red envelope left in his mailbox with nothing inside. A photo of Merrick's scar tucked into the windshield wiper of his car. A pressed patch of the Thanatos insignia slid under his office door. He started looking over his shoulder. Good. Because guilt should have a shape, a temperature, a sound. And every time he heard it, it should wear my face. The military had stripped me of title and badge. But they couldn't erase the ink. Not the ink on my arm and not the stain of truth on their hands. So I kept digging. And the more I unearthed, the more the lines connected. There was no clerical error, no accident in Merrick's fake death. This had been orchestrated, signed, sealed, and filed under necessary casualty for career preservation. But I was done preserving theirs. I wasn't seeking revenge in the old way. This wasn't about fire or fury. It was about exposure, one thread at a time, and that voice recording. That was the match I planned to strike when the whole house was full of gas. They thought they'd buried me, but I was already behind them, shovel in hand. I didn't show up to my father's retirement ceremony for closure. I came for confirmation, not the kind you sign stamp or say aloud. I came for the flicker in the eye, the half-second pause, the crack in the mask that says, "She knows." Because if even one of them looked at me like I was still Captain Harper, not the incident, not the breakdown, not the daughter who couldn't let it go, then the truth would have a pulse again. The hall was filled with the kind of polished, pre-packaged glory my father worshipped. Every chair aligned, flags crisply draped, chandeliers gleaming like medals on the ceiling. He wore his full uniform pressed sharp, his chest weighted with brass that didn't belong to him alone. My sister greeted guests near the entrance, smile-wide champagne flute in hand, hair curled like it belonged in a magazine spread. She caught sight of me and blinked. She didn't wave, just leaned toward her husband, whispered something, and turned away like I was dust someone had forgotten to sweep. I walked the length of the room and found a seat near the back. My jacket, standard issue but worn, stood out like a relic among tailored suits and silk blouses. I rolled up my sleeve deliberately, letting the tattoo breathe. The serpent wrapped around the broken watch. Some turned to look. Most didn't bother. A few narrowed their eyes, whispering behind manicured nails. I could hear the fragments of gossip. "Is that her she came? Didn't she get discharged for, you know?" My father took the stage. He looked out across the crowd like a man inspecting a battlefield, calculating, surveying, triumphant. Then his eyes landed on me. For a second, just one, his posture stiffened. Then he cleared his throat and continued. "There are moments in a soldier's life when the uniform becomes more than fabric. It becomes legacy." He smiled, but not everyone carries it well. Laughter, soft and knowing. My sister chuckled audibly, eyes grazing the back of my head like a blade. I didn't move, didn't blink. Let them enjoy the illusion. And sometimes, he added, the uniform wears out before the soldier does. That's just the truth of time. My hand clenched around the program in my lap. White paper, black ink. No mention of Thanatos 12. No mention of Merrick. No mention of me. Erasure wrapped in celebration. That's what this was. He kept talking stories about leadership, sacrifice, duty. Stories that edged just close enough to real events to pass as earned but always filtered through his lens. He rewrote everything, and the room applauded. Because they believed him, because they needed to. I scanned the crowd, one face at a time. A few glanced at me puzzled. Some looked away, but one man near the corner, gray-hair cane, resting by his chair, watched me too long. He knew something, or thought he did. Either way, it was enough. I stood up, walked out the side door and into the hallway. I didn't need to make a scene, not yet. That wasn't why I came. I came to measure the silence, to weigh the lies against their echo chambers. I came to see if truth still had a shadow in that room. And it did. Not many, not loud, but there were cracks in their certainty. I leaned against the wall, staring at the framed photos lining the corridor. Smiling men in desert uniforms, handshakes with presidents posed glory. All carefully curated, all missing the blood behind the ribbons. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slower than panic, faster than casual. My sister. She stepped out, closed the door behind her, and turned. "I didn't think you'd show," she said. I waited. She folded her arms. "That tattoo still showing it off, huh?" I raised an eyebrow. "You remembered what it means," she shrugged. "Just looks like something a cult would wear." I said nothing. She leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Whatever you're doing, Dad's worked his whole life for this. Just let him have it." "I'm not taking anything," I replied. "I'm just reminding people what was never theirs to begin with." She scoffed. "That's rich. Coming from the girl who cracked under pressure and disappeared." I didn't crack. I was erased. She shook her head and walked away, but I caught it. That flicker. That brief shimmer in her eyes that betrayed what she wouldn't say. She knew. They all did. And they'd rather drown in medals than admit they watched me burn. But I wasn't there for their apology. I was there for the next step. Because rumors are smoke. And I came carrying fire. 2 days after the ceremony, I got a message from General Ellison. No signature, no insignia, just coordinates. I followed them anyway. They led me to Section 43 of Arlington National Cemetery. A row of graves lined in surgical precision. Honor carved in stone. Ellison was already there, standing with his back to me. No uniform, just a long gray coat and a cane clutched tight in one hand. His posture wasn't military anymore, but his presence still carried command. I approached slowly. He didn't turn around. Instead, he said quietly, "You ever wonder why some men get statues and others get silence?" I didn't answer. He finally looked at me. His eyes were tired in a way that metals couldn't heal. "I owe you," he said, "but not for pulling me out of Helmand. I owe you because I owe Merrick everything." He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. Thick, yellowed, government marked. He handed it to me. I opened it with fingers I didn't realize were trembling. Inside was a medical file, U.S. Army Medical Center Landstuhl, Germany, date May 4th, 2017, patient unidentified male, late 50s, multiple shrapnel wounds, right clavicle fracture, partial facial burns. Treatment duration 5 days. Condition stabilized. Attached was a grainy photo. The man's face partially wrapped, but the scar on his temple unmistakable. Merrick, still alive, still real, still hidden. I looked up at Ellison, his jaw clenched as he continued. I requested that file 5 times in the last 3 years. Each time it came back redacted or lost. Until now. Why now, I asked. Because the doctor who signed off on his recovery just had a breakdown. Retired early, diagnosed with PTSD. Started speaking to the press, nothing clear, just fragments. I flipped to the signature page. There it was, clear and intact. Captain Langston Voss. The name felt familiar. Ellison nodded, sensing the connection click in my brain. He served under your father, logistics officer, paperwork expert. Never questioned orders until something broke in him. He paused. Voss is the one who processed your discharge recommendation, too. Back in 17. My stomach tightened. That makes no sense, I said. Voss and I never crossed paths in the field. You didn't have to. All it took was his signature. Your father handed him the order. Voss made it real. I looked back at the file. Every page a nail in the coffin they tried to bury me in. But this time, the coffin cracked. Ellison sighed. I can't undo what they did to you. And I can't promise justice. But I can give you this. He gestured at the folder. And I can tell you what Merrick told me before he disappeared. My breath caught. You saw him twice, he said. Once when they were transferring him to a private German facility. He wasn't speaking yet. Second time was 6 months later. He came to see me. He looked better, stronger. Why didn't he come forward, he said, and I quote, "Some lies are too big to break from the inside. Someone else has to set the fire." I swallowed. He meant you, Ellison added softly. The wind shifted through the trees. Leaves whispered like voices not yet heard. I looked around us, rows and rows of stone names, numbers, ranks. Some buried with honor, some buried with secrets. Merrick's grave. I said, "It's here, isn't it?" Ellison pointed to a headstone behind him. Captain Merrick J. Allen, born 1961, died 2017. Faithful until the end. I walked over and touched the cold granite. He was alive when this was carved. They knew. They all knew. How many people signed off on this lie, I asked. Enough to make it permanent, Ellison said. But not enough to stop you. Silence sat between us. Then Ellison whispered almost to himself, "I saw what you did that day. I watched you carry him. I saw the fire zone you crossed. I never forgot. But I stayed quiet." He looked down. I told myself it was to protect the chain of command. But the truth is I was afraid of what would happen if I questioned the system that made me. I nodded. That was the problem. Loyalty without questioning becomes complicity. I stared back at the stone. "I'm going to finish what Merrick started," I said. "I know," Ellison replied. Then he turned to leave. But before he did, he stopped and said, "If you need a witness when the time comes, you have one." And just like that, he walked away back hunched but spine straight. I stood alone among the names. Merrick had vanished into silence to keep me alive. Now it was my turn to speak, not just for him, but for every soldier they buried twice. First in uniform, then in shame. I folded the file, tucked it under my arm, and walked back through the gates. Not as the ghost they left behind, but as the fire they couldn't put out. After meeting with General Ellison at Arlington, something inside me refused to settle. The truth wasn't enough. Not yet. Not when it was still mine alone. I needed to know if I had ever truly been alone in this. So I started reaching out quietly to veterans who had disappeared from the system like I had. No fanfare, no citations. Just names that stopped showing up on rosters with discharge notes that said more in silence than in words. I used old networks, code phrases buried deep in our shared language. One name came back again and again: Jacobs. Sergeant First Class DeAndre Jacobs, Delta Recon 2012-2017. Discharged for inconsistent conduct under pressure. No follow-up, no appeal. I found him working security at a shipyard in Baltimore. He met me at a coffee shop off the docks, face-hardened eyes watching the exits, but something in his posture softened when I introduced myself. "You're Harper," he said. "Thanatos 12. I nodded. I heard about what happened. Merrick, the fallout, your father. I leaned in. "You were cut too." He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "You're not the only one they erased. I know 3 others, all from different units, different branches, same pattern." "What pattern?" I asked. He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket and opened it. Inside were 4 names, including mine. Next to each discharge, dates, reasons, final commanding officer, and a signature. All signed off by the same man, Colonel Franklin J. Harper. My father. My throat tightened. These men, Jacobs said, pointing to the list, were decorated. One had 2 Purple Hearts. Another ran recon in Kandahar with 0 casualties. And me, I pulled a unit out of a minefield blindfolded. His voice was calm, but his jaw clenched. "We weren't weak," he said. "We were inconvenient." I studied the names, not just names, stories, lives rerouted by the same hand. I asked him if the others would talk. He shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. One drinks, one disappeared, one... I don't know. I just know this isn't about one bad report. It's a pattern. Surgical, deliberate. Back at home, I opened my old service laptop, the one I kept offline all these years, and pulled up encrypted notes I'd never deleted. Dates, operations, signatures. I matched the formatting on all 4 discharges. Same phrasing, unstable under high-level directives. Same structure, 1 paragraph of praise, 1 ambiguity, then 1 damning sentence. Same clearance stamp, FJH. The realization hit like recoil. My father didn't cut me out because I failed. He cut me out because I wouldn't fall in line. I remembered something Merrick once said to me in the desert, back when we still believed loyalty ran both ways. "Some people aren't afraid of your weakness, Harper. They're afraid of your strength when it's pointed at the wrong target." Wrong target, or maybe the right one. I printed out the discharges and laid them side by side. All of them read like fiction written by the same ghostwriter. I couldn't tell whether I was furious or vindicated. Maybe both. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was policy enforced in shadows. And I knew then it wasn't enough to clear my name. I had to rewrite the record. I reached out to 2 more former officers I trusted: Major Bloom, now teaching ethics at West Point, and Captain Reyes, now in private intelligence. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to ask if someone had 3 identical discharges. Same authors, same language, would that hold up under review? Bloom replied. Only if the author had something to lose. Reyes said it would scream manipulation to anyone with half a clearance and a clean conscience. That's all I needed. I drafted a report, anonymous, detailed, precise. I included the documents, the matching patterns, the signatures. I didn't accuse directly, I let the evidence speak. At the top I wrote submitted in the interest of historical integrity. And I sent it to 3 watchdog journalists, 2 congressional aides, and 1 legal nonprofit that handled wrongful military discharges. Then I waited. I didn't seek revenge in flames. I was planting seeds, letting the truth grow wild where red tape once strangled it. But inside me something was still burning. This wasn't the end. This was preparation. Because truth without a name meant nothing. And I wanted my name back. Not just cleared, restored. It was strange how in the quiet aftermath of doing everything right, the anger finally came. Not rage, not chaos, but the kind of anger that plans, that memorizes every detail, that knows exactly where to cut. I wasn't here to make him suffer. I was here to make him see me. Because the one thing my father couldn't accept was that I had never needed his name to make one for myself. And now I would make sure the world knew the name Camille Harper not as a footnote, not as a mistake, but as the woman who dug up what they buried and held it to the light until it blinded them. The room shimmered with formal smiles and medals clinking against polished fabric. I sat near the back intentionally beneath a wall-mounted flag, where the shadow fell over my shoulders like a curtain. My father was already 3 speakers in giving his retirement speech, with the same cadence he used for decades, calculated pauses, carefully measured humility. Like he had rehearsed in a mirror so long, even the creases in his face knew where to fold. My years of service, he said, have been nothing without the men and women beside me. I stand here today not as a hero, but as one who stood among them. The applause followed on cue. He gestured toward my sister in the front row, who beamed like a politician's daughter. This family has kept me grounded. In all my years, they've given me strength. He never once glanced my way. Not even a flicker, as if my presence so deliberately visible in this worn combat jacket, my sleeves rolled up, was just another invisible thread in the tapestry he curated so perfectly. Then a subtle shift in the room, the hush of footsteps measured heavy with presence. From the side entrance, General Ellison walked in. Not on the program. Not expected. Heads turned. The murmurs began. He moved straight through the aisle past officers and their families, past rising eyebrows and unsure salutes, until he stopped a few feet in front of me. His eyes didn't search the crowd. They locked directly on me. And then on my arm, the tattoo of Thanatos 12. Faded but unmistakable. A coiled serpent wrapped around a broken clock. His eyes widened. He froze. And in a voice louder than the microphone could have ever projected, he said, "Captain Harper, the last standing member of Thanatos 12. Silence cracked open into noise, a beat of disbelief. Then clapping, slow, then thunderous. People stood. I didn't. I remained seated, hands resting on my thighs, eyes on my father. He froze. The corner of his lip twitched, but his expression was otherwise locked stone, trying not to crumble. My sister leaned toward him. "What the hell is going on?" Ellison turned to the podium. The MC stammered, unsure whether to interject. But protocol had no defense against seniority. Ellison took the mic. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he said. But I couldn't stay away, not after receiving an anonymous report containing documents that have long been buried. He looked back at me. I didn't move. Among those documents, he continued, were discharge papers, 4 of them. All identical in language, all targeting soldiers who had done nothing wrong. And among them, Captain Camille Harper, decorated field commander of Thanatos 12. She was listed as unstable. He paused. She was anything but. The tension in the room shifted. Chests stopped rising. No one clapped now. They were listening too closely. "Camille," he said, turning again to me, "dragged Colonel Merrick 18 kilometers under fire, through an extraction zone with 0 cover. I know because I was supposed to be dead. And the man who saved my life, Colonel Merrick, owed his life to her." Gasps. A woman in the second row dropped her program. My father finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't the place." But Ellison wasn't speaking to him. He was speaking to everyone else. To deny a soldier's truth is one thing, he said, looking around. But to bury their name, their service, and their honor, that's treason against memory. I watched the faces: confusion, disbelief, sympathy, shock, and on some recognition, because lies aren't always erased. Sometimes they're just hidden in plain sight. My sister stood halfway, then sank back into her chair. No words came from her mouth now. I still didn't stand. This wasn't the part where I soaked in applause. This was the unveiling. The curtain lifted. And my father. He couldn't look away anymore. "Ellison," he managed, forcing composure. "This is highly inappropriate." Ellison turned, stepping down from the podium, voice still calm. "What's inappropriate is that you looked your daughter in the eye and told her she was unfit, when in truth she was a threat to your narrative." Whispers exploded. A few guests stood. Others pulled out their phones, pretending to check messages, but really recording. No one wanted to miss the unraveling of a legacy. "I have the documents," Ellison said. "They're being reviewed, and more will follow. You'll find that the truth, even when buried, has a habit of clawing its way back up." My father looked ready to bolt, but he didn't. He knew better, because if he ran, the story would run faster. I finally stood. Not because they did, not for their claps, not for the vindication, but because the weight in my chest was no longer shame. It was clarity. I stepped toward him only a few feet. His face, for the first time in my life, was small. Not the towering officer, not the flawless speaker. Just a man caught in his own web. "I served," I said low enough that only he could hear. "I served when you wouldn't. I carried your burden through gunfire. I wore your name even when it burned. But you forgot something, Dad." I tapped my tattoo. "You may have inked your name on paper, but this ink is in blood. You couldn't burn it off if you tried." He looked at my arm, at the symbol of the team. He betrayed the mission. He lied about the daughter he disowned. Then he looked away. I walked past him, past the podium, past the men who once called me ghost, past the women who whispered my story with tilted heads. And I left. Because revenge wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the silence that followed, when every person in that room had to rethink what they thought they knew about Colonel Franklin J. Harper, and about the daughter he tried to erase. 3 days later, I was summoned. The official letterhead read "Internal Affairs, Testimony Request." But they weren't just asking for my story. They were bracing for the storm I was bringing. I arrived at the base in uniform, not because I wanted to impress them, but because I needed them to remember I still fit in it. No medals, no ribbons, just the jacket. The old one they mocked. Inside the hearing room, the temperature was clinical, too clean, too bright. A row of officers sat behind a polished desk, flanked by 2 flags, the nation and the unit. Cameras on, recorders live. Behind me, Ellison sat in the audience, silent and still. Just his presence said enough. The panel began. "Miss Camille Harper, you are here today to offer testimony regarding Operation Echo Rays and the aftermath of the Thanatos 12 deployment in 2017. You may begin." I placed the first document on the table, a copy of the mission report. Pages 1-3, official version. Page 4, the redacted section. Page 5, what I found in a leaked draft, saved in metadata. Page 6, my annotations in red ink. "This is the original brief," I said. "The one that includes coordinates of our last known location and the decision log from command that abandoned us." I didn't look at my father. I spoke to the table, the walls, the silence. But he could feel every word. Next, the audio. I pressed play. If she knows Merrick is alive, everything collapses. I'll lose command the post the awards. She won't stop. You know her. That was my father's voice. No static, no edits. Just the full truth spoken in fear. There was a silence. One of the officers shifted in his seat. Another cleared his throat. Then I laid out the photographs: Merrick in a hospital bed. German facility, Same scar across the clavicle, oxygen mask, eyes open. The final item, a handwriting analysis. My father's signature next to a false one, both meant to authorize the same document. The analyst's conclusion, forged by proxy. Stroke inconsistency detected. One of the officers raised an eyebrow. How did you acquire this information, Ms. Harper? I asked questions. Unlike most of you, I didn't fear the answers. A pause. And then the twist I didn't expect. They called the counter-witness. My sister. She walked in like a diplomat on camera. Cream suit, poised posture, clipboard in hand. She didn't look at me. Ms. Harper, the chair said as a senior communications advisor to the defense office, please state your position on the allegations brought forward. She smiled politely, tightly. Then she said the line that split the room in half. Camille Harper is not a hero. She's a survivor, and there's a difference. My stomach didn't clench. It burned. I stood. Not because I was angry, but because I was clear. You're right, I said, voice steady. I survived. And that's become a crime in a place where they bury mistakes. The panel didn't interrupt. They didn't stop her. They didn't stop me. She continued. My sister has always had an inclination for drama, for exaggeration. Her dismissal from service was on psychological grounds, not political ones. I walked toward the bench and laid down one final file. This is a statement from Lieutenant Rosa Jacobs, one of 4 officers discharged with identical wording. Same evaluation, same reviewer, same ink. 3 of them male, 2 decorated. I looked at my sister straight in the eyes. When did survival become something shameful? When did being too much become a reason to erase someone? She hesitated. Just for a second. Her fingers gripped her clipboard a little tighter. The lead officer spoke. We will review the documents. You're dismissed, Ms. Harper. Please remain available should we need further clarification. I nodded and stepped down. As I passed my sister, I whispered, not loud, but enough for her to hear. You weren't just protecting him. You were protecting yourself. Her face froze, but her eyes flinched. Back outside, the sun was setting. I sat on the steps, hands resting on my knees. Ellison joined me, no words at first, just quiet. Then he said, you did what no one else dared to. I nodded, because they thought I'd disappear. He smiled faintly. They underestimated how hard truth breathes under dirt. The investigation wasn't over, but the silence had been broken. And once it breaks, it echoes. He didn't speak, not a single word. While the room sifted through every piece of my evidence, while my sister's voice reverberated with crafted half-truths, he just sat there stone-faced, not stoic, not composed, just hollow. And then without ceremony, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a pen, and made one mark. A single line through his own name on the strategic reserve list. It was subtle, barely noticeable, the kind of gesture you'd miss if you blinked. But I saw it. Everyone saw it. The pen moved like it had weight far beyond ink, the kind of weight that builds over decades of decision-making, of hiding things, of signing names to other people's silence. No one said anything. There was no gasping, no dramatic pause in the room's rhythm. Just a faint rustle, papers shifting, chairs creaking, as if the space itself was adjusting to the gravity of that one quiet act. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, because it wasn't victory I wanted. It was vacancy. I didn't need his confession, I needed his absence. I didn't need the world to hear him say he buried me. I needed the system to no longer allow him to bury anyone else. When my sister turned to him, her mouth parted slightly, like she was waiting for him to intervene, for the great Commander Harper to speak up, defend his legacy, protect their version of truth. But nothing came. His eyes didn't even meet hers. They just stared straight ahead as though they were looking at something past the walls. Or maybe just at the walls he had built around himself. It's strange how silence can feel louder than any courtroom outburst. That moment, that void, carried more meaning than all the words we had slung at each other during the hearing. His silence wasn't absence, it was surrender. An unspoken acknowledgement that everything I said, Everything I'd fought for, everything I'd uncovered was true. Later, I walked past him as the room emptied. He didn't turn, didn't nod. His hand rested on the table, fingers slightly curled, still holding the pen. I paused for a breath. I could have said something, could have delivered a final line, something poetic or cutting, but I didn't. Because some endings don't need words, some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be left alone, long enough to breathe. 3 days after the hearing, I returned home to find a plain, unmarked envelope resting against my front door. No postage, no return address, just my name written in a hand I hadn't seen on paper in years. I knew immediately who it was from. My father's handwriting had always carried a particular weight, tight, squared off, restrained, as if he were afraid the ink itself might say too much. Inside, there was no letter, only a single photograph creased at the corners, faded by time. It showed 2 young soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, laughing in a way that looked almost reckless. My father, younger than I'd ever seen him outside of family albums, and Colonel Merrick, his posture already stiff with purpose, a wide scar barely visible along his chin. I turned the photo over. There was a line written in the same steady hand. He chose the wrong man back then, but not this time. No signature, no date, just those 12 words. I read them twice. Then again, there was no apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd done or what he hadn't. But that was the language of my father, no warmth, just clarity. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to read between the lines. Because what mattered wasn't whether he finally believed me. What mattered was that he had finally stepped out of the way. That day, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't mean something, but because I was too tired to. 7 years of hunting shadows, digging through silence, chasing ghosts for justice that should have never needed chasing. Those years had carved out something inside me that tears couldn't fill. I walked to the kitchen table, set the photograph down, and just stared at it. For a long time. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was the edge of a tattoo Merrick's. The serpent coiled around a broken clock. The same symbol I bore on my arm. It wasn't just ink, it was witness. And now it had spoken in the only way it could, by refusing to fade. That night I didn't sleep. Not out of worry, but because I finally had peace. There would be no public apology, no formal restoration. The military didn't work like that. It patched its uniforms better than it patched its conscience. But something had shifted. In the days that followed, I began to receive quiet emails. One from a retired medic, who remembered a name that disappeared from the logs. Another from a former analyst who said he had questions for years, but was told not to ask. Each message was short, careful, but it was enough. A conversation had begun. And sometimes that's all justice needs, a voice to be heard, even if it's a whisper at first. I didn't reply to all of them. Some people weren't ready for a conversation. Some just needed to say they saw it now. But I saved every message, every word. I printed them out and kept them in a folder right beside the photo of my father and Merrick, because history has a habit of being rewritten, and I had no intention of letting it happen again. One morning, about a week after the photo arrived, I went to the old base where Thanatos 12 had trained. It was mostly storage units, now retired gear, rusted metal, forgotten paperwork no one wanted to sort through. But I found the wall, the memorial wall. Faded bronze plaques chipped at the edges, names etched in rows. Some had flowers beneath them. Some didn't. Merrick's name wasn't there, neither was mine. I pulled a marker from my pocket, and with one swift motion, wrote a single word across the base of the wall: survivors. Because we weren't gone. We had just been erased. And now, line by line, name by name, the ink was coming back. I left the city 2 weeks after the hearing. No press, no handshakes, no parade. I packed everything I owned into a military duffel and headed northwest Montana, where the air didn't feel like someone else's permission. I bought a small plot of land outside Helena, just enough to build a modest training facility, bare bones but efficient. A gravel path led up to a refurbished barn I turned into a gym. No logo, no website, no name on the front. Just a metal plate on the door that read, come as you are. That's all I ever wanted for us, for the ones who had been erased, mislabeled, outmaneuvered. Soldiers who carried more than physical scars. I wasn't opening a business. I was building a place where people didn't need to explain their worth. I ran morning drills by the ridge and mental conditioning by the creek. We did tactical runs in the pine woods and reflection sessions by the fire pit. I taught them everything that saved my life and everything that nearly destroyed it. And I reminded them always that a signature on a report is not the final word on who they are. 3 months in, we had 7 trainees. None of them looked alike. Different backgrounds, ranks, and reasons for being cast aside. But one thing united them: they'd all been told they didn't belong. And here that was the very reason they did. Then one morning, just after sunrise, a car pulled up slowly through the gravel. A teenage girl stepped out. She couldn't have been older than 17, with sharp eyes and a hesitant walk. She held a manila envelope close to her chest, as if guarding something fragile. I watched from the steps. She approached but didn't speak. Instead, she reached into the envelope and pulled out a faded photo. It was Merrick, younger, standing beside a woman in uniform. I remembered the picture. It was taken 2 weeks before the mission that changed everything. My dad told me about the woman who saved him, she said finally, her voice soft but sure. He said she didn't just drag him out of fire. She dragged the truth out of a place everyone wanted to forget. I remained quiet. He said if I ever wanted to learn what courage looked like, I should find her, she continued. I want to train with you, if you'll have me. I looked at her wrists. No tattoos, no insignia. Just the resolve in her stance. Did he tell you the full story? I asked. She nodded. He told me what the system tried to do to you. And what you did anyway. I took the photo, studied the edges like I hadn't seen it 100 times before. Then let's begin. She joined the drills that same day. No special treatment, no easy outs. But something shifted in the air. Her presence was a reminder that truth doesn't disappear, it plants seeds. Sometimes it takes years, but it grows back stronger. As weeks passed, she became one of our best. Not the fastest, not the strongest, but the most relentless. She didn't ask for praise, she asked for repetition. She wasn't there to be impressive. She was there to earn her ground. One evening, after a long day of field work, she handed me a small journal. Can I read you something? I nodded. She opened to a bookmarked page and began, Day 12. Camille taught us how to read terrain today, but the real lesson was about seeing what others ignore, signs of movement patterns in nature and in people. She said surviving isn't just about being smart. It's about refusing to let the lies shape your story. I listened in silence. She closed the journal, tears gathering but not falling. I used to think heroes wore medals, but now I think they wear scars. That night I sat by the fire alone. I thought about the tattoo on my arm, the serpent coiled around a broken clock. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it does expose what's been hidden. And under the right flame, even the hardest ink glows. Letters started arriving, quiet ones, from people I hadn't seen in years. One from Jacobs, another from Ellison. Even one from a former admin who'd signed off on a false record and wanted to make it right. No apologies, just acknowledgments. That's all I ever needed. We expanded the barn, built another training ground. This time, one of the beams had something carved into it, Thanatos Rises. I didn't carve it. One of the trainees did. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was someone who came before. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the name no longer frightened them. It empowered them. One morning, a newspaper showed up at my door. I didn't subscribe. Someone must have sent it. Front page, military reopens case on 2017 border Operation Truth. Buried truth resurfaced. I read the article. There was no mention of me by name, but buried in the final paragraph was a sentence: a previously classified report was recently authenticated by medical sources in Germany. Colonel Merrick is confirmed to have survived and is currently under protected care. My heart clenched. Not because it vindicated me, but because it meant the truth could no longer be denied, even by silence. A week later, I received another envelope. No return address. Inside was a single item Merrick's dog tag. Cleaned. Intact. Taped to the back was a sticky note. He remembers. I clutched it in my hand until my knuckles turned white. In this life, you're lucky if someone remembers your name. Luckier still if they remember your truth. I stood at the edge of the ridge that night, overlooking the land that had become my sanctuary. The wind rustled the trees like whispers from those who never got to speak. And I said aloud, I never needed their permission to be seen. I never did. But I damn well earned it. I sit at my desk, the same one I carried with me from base to base, the same one that held every failed appeal, every scribbled out name, every letter that was never answered. It's scratched, weathered, and the surface dips slightly to the left, but it's mine. On top of it now lies a leather-bound notebook, not military-issued, just something I picked up at a roadside bookstore on my way to Montana. Inside are photos I've painstakingly recovered, some grainy, some nearly torn beyond recognition, all taken before names were erased, before medals were misattributed or records redacted. There's a list I've written by hand, updated every time I find someone like me, someone dismissed not for failure, but for being too inconvenient, too honest, or too skilled. The list now holds 37 names. I never contacted most of them. Some don't even know I found their files, but I keep them here so they exist somewhere. And then at the very back of the notebook, folded like something precious, a letter. It arrived months after the hearing, unsigned in a plain envelope with no return address. But I knew the handwriting immediately. It was Merrick's. Neat, compact. The way he used to take notes during field training, where every word mattered and space was limited. The letter only has 2 lines. Thank you for keeping the truth alive, even if I never deserved it. I must have read it 100 times, memorized every loop of the K, every soft slant in his punctuation. It wasn't forgiveness nor absolution. It was acknowledgement. And for people like us, acknowledgement is rarer than medals. Beneath the letter, I take my pen, a simple black roller ball, nothing fancy, and I write, "The truth doesn't need permission to exist." It's something I've come to understand in the quiet moments after the fight has passed, after the name is cleared but the damage still lingers. No ceremony can restore what was taken. No courtroom can resurrect the trust that died in silence. But truth, like ink, has permanence. You can try to burn it, bury it, erase it, but if you look hard enough, it bleeds through the page. That's why I keep writing. I didn't tell this story for applause. If anything, I told it because silence had become too loud to bear. When they took my name off the list, when they filed my career under unfit for duty, when they rewrote the ending to a story I was still living, I stayed quiet. I thought maybe if I waited, they'd fix it. Maybe someone else would speak. No one did. And so I became the one they whispered about at reunions, the one who went too far, got too close, couldn't let things go. I was the cautionary tale they passed down to new recruits. But here's what I learned. You don't need their approval to be worthy. You don't need a ceremony to be seen. And you don't need a headline to matter. You just need to last long enough for the truth to catch up. It took me years to understand that surviving isn't shameful, it's an act of resistance. When people try to erase you living, becomes defiance. Telling your story becomes justice. There's a power in refusing to disappear. And I know I'm not alone. I know there are others out there, people whose efforts were minimized, whose records were altered, whose truths were buried under more convenient narratives. This is for them. To the soldier who took the fall so their superior could get promoted. To the nurse who stayed during the evacuation but got none of the credit. To the translator who risked their life for intel but was denied a visa. To the quiet ones, the erased ones, the ones who carried everything and got nothing. Write your name in ink, not to prove them wrong, but so that you won't be forgotten. Ink is permanent. It doesn't ask for permission. It stays when applause fades, when the stage clears, when the camera stops rolling. It stays in the margins waiting for someone to finally turn the page and say, "Who is this? Let them find you." Let them read what they tried to erase. Let them see the truth you kept alive, one breath, one step, one page at a time. Because legacy isn't what you're given, it's what you leave behind. Before we say goodbye, I just want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with coffee brewing in the background, light streaming through the window, the world still stretching awake? Or maybe it's late too late, and stories like this are what you reach for when sleep won't come. When you need to remember you're not alone. Wherever you are, thank you for being here. If this story spoke to you even just a little, consider subscribing to the channel. Not just for more stories, but to join a community that still believes in honesty and healing and in the quiet power of second chances. Drop a comment and let us know how this story made you feel. We read every word, and carry this one with you, okay? Because sometimes the miracle isn't a loud knock on your door. It's a silent truth waiting patiently hidden in ink, just for you to find it. Take care. We'll see you in the next story.